straight from the mayor's mouth, with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.
Hello everyone and welcome to Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Hello there, Matt, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks again for coming along and chatting to me about all things mayoral, council, Dubbo, all sorts of things.
It's always my pleasure. Hey mate, did you hear during the week about the earthquake in Orange?
Yeah, I did actually.
What's going on there?
I don't think we felt any of it here. I can't remember feeling an earthquake in Dubbo since maybe the Newcastle earthquake, which obviously was a pretty big one.
Yes.
A lot of damage done, unfortunately, in Newcastle, and people did talk about feeling that in Dubbo, but I don't think anyone in Dubbo felt the orange one.
I didn't feel anything, but I heard about it the next morning and it sort of came across 2.6 or a 2.8 or something like that. Look, I'm not really into all the earthquake measurements. I think it goes to a 7 or 8 or a 9 or something, doesn't it? So,
well, if you get to those numbers, you're getting into trouble. You get into Christchurch sort of territory.
That's right. Things are starting to fall down around us. So.
Having said that, people do hear some of the bridge construction work that's going on at the moment, and they think there's something major happening underneath the earth, because it's amazing how far that travels. Yeah. I've had people from kilometres away from there saying there was this strange noise. It started in the morning. It was very rhythmic and it was pounding away. They think maybe the Phantom's here with his drums, perhaps. But it's amazing how far it travels.
Some 18-year-old with a very big bass beat chopping through in the drums. I guess that's right. It, yes.
Yeah, but you do hear it a long way away. And probably particularly in the morning when there's not a lot of other noise, there's not the hustle and bustle of the city as such. Yeah, so quite incredible there. But that's not an earthquake, that's just driving pylons into the ground.
Oh, look. Now listen, speaking of kids and things and talking about it, during the week you were part of the new Rhino design panel judging. So talk us through now. These are the little rhinos that we see poking around all over Dubbo. They're wonderful little tourist attractions in their own right. So are we repainting them or what's happening? 3
of them, correct. And they've just gotten to the stage where they're a bit tired. They're out in the weather, obviously 24 hours a day. People come and have photos taken with them. They climb them. They shouldn't, of course, but they climb them. Yes. And so it's at the stage now where it's time to do a refresh. So we put out a competition amongst the schools.
Right.
And we got some great entries that came in. And the CEO, as part of managing that process, asked if I'd like to be one of the judges on that panel. So there were a couple of staff members that have expertise in this area to be on the judging panel.
Oh, well, they've got an artistic background, have they? Or?
Well, they're responsible for various parts of the cultural centre. So some people that have skills and knowledge around art and obviously involved in that on a day-to-day basis with council. And then we had Matt Wright, who's the chair of Spark, and that's obviously involved with art.
Right.
And then we also had Erin from the Chamber of Commerce, the president of the Chamber of Commerce. So I thought that'd be a good little judging panel.
Yes.
And so, again, Murray as CEO just picked that judging panel, got that together, and I was actually really impressed. It was a really tough job. Well, they need those sort of processes.
Oh, absolutely.
You're looking through them all. You can see the effort. They had to put a design in. They were given blank pictures of a rhino, of both sides of a rhino, and then they were to put the design in. And they also had to put a story in. Oh. And one of the things that was interesting as we discussed it in the judging panel, it's interesting because you drive past a rhino maybe at 70 k's an hour as you're coming into one of the entrances. You don't really have time to stop always and read the story.
No.
The story maybe has to be obvious about it, but again, some of the thoughts that the kids put into the stories behind it, they were quite impressive as well.
So the stories about rhnos, or were they just stories in general?
No, about their artwork, about what that artwork meant.
Okay, so the artwork itself it doesn't have to do with the Western Plains Zoo or Dubbo or anything. It could be just a general story of their life or something like that?
Anything at all. So anything that they knew how they were going to be used, so they knew they were going to be used on the entrances to do a refresh. And so it was put whatever you want on there.
Yeah, right.
The rhino is your oyster as such, and you put whatever you want on there and tell the story about that. So it was actually quite good, and it was pretty tough because I went through, we needed to pick 3 designs, and I went through and we had a judging process, we had a scoring system and went through all that process. But you probably, I think when I looked at the ones that I came out at the top of my judging process, there were probably easily 6 that I would have been quite happy with any of those 6 designs being on the rhinos. And then the rest of the judges went through that process and end up with the 3 top designs out of that judging process.
Right.
And so those 3 winners will be announced. They get a $200 gift card, each of those 3 kids. So it's not too bad. Yes. And then we'll actually go out to some local artists to actually apply that artwork from paper, from the kids' designs.
Isn't that a nice idea? So the kids themselves don't paint it. They actually get artists to come in, paint the kids' work that they've designed.
Correct. And they will actually talk to the artist, because there are some that might need to be modified. Or the artist might say, well, that isn't going to quite work on a Rhino because I need to be able to do it in a certain way.
Yep.
But if you thought about just modifying it slightly, so they'll be consulted with the real artist as they go through that process. And then obviously a little bit of interpretation, because there was a 2D design that was done for the left and the right side of the Rhino, but you've got to wrap it around. So what exactly do you want the head to look like? Because it's only the side of the head that you've drawn there. But
it's incredibly exciting too for the kids as well and their families to know the fact that, here you go, this is my son or my daughter's artwork, and you can stand as proud as punch next to it and get all the rallies around, and every time you drive past you can say, that's my design.
That's right. And one day they'll be winning an Archibald prize, taking home the $100,000 prize money, and going, well, my real passion started when I won a $200 gift voucher way back with Dubbo when I did a design on the bottom of a Rhino, perhaps. So,
mate, I absolutely love that. Now, Matt, I'm looking through here and I notice there's a media release that's come through from EnergyCo about the renewable energy zone. Now, they're talking about here the potential expansion of this zone. Now, I know we've mentioned it briefly on some of our podcasts in regards to this. This is the renewable energy zone around Wellington. So what's the media release stating?
It talks about the change of the size. And I'll read one part of the media release just so I get this exactly right from a wording perspective. The New South Wales Government is proposing to amend the declaration of the Central West Orana Renewable Energy Zone to increase the intended network capacity of the REZ to support the state's future energy needs.
Right.
So it is talking about a proposal to amend. The way that I've heard conversations around this over the last probably month or so it's been talked about is that it needs to happen. It's going to happen. But, of course, with any of these processes, you put it out on some sort of public submissions, public exhibition.
So when you say increase, what are we talking about here?
Well, the current size, according to the Network Infrastructure Strategy, is 3 gigawatts. So that's effectively the maximum capacity that it can generate.
So what does that look like in layman's terms for people? 3 gigawatts of power. And how many homes and that are we potentially trying to energise and to source from that point of view?
Well, I'll talk about that in 1 second, but I'll talk about the size increase first.
Yeah.
So it's 3 gigawatts at the moment. They're talking about they want to, still under stage 1, they want to go to 4.5 gigawatts, so a 50%
so half
increase.
the size again, yeah.
That's right. But then they are saying by 2038, under stage 2 of the REZ, they want to go up to 6 gigawatts.
Okay,
so that's
double
pretty exciting.
the size. Okay.
Double the size. That is exciting, and I'll come to why it's exciting in a moment. So what's that look like is your question then.
Yep.
To give you an idea, when you go down to Wellington and go across towards Mudgee, you see 33 wind turbines. The wind turbines there, approximately 113 megawatts.
Right.
Now, they're older wind turbines. Keep in mind, we've talked about this before, they're not technically part of the REZ because they were built before the new transmission lines, which is where the REZ comes into play. So think about that. So 113 megawatts for those 33. If you multiply that by 10, very roughly, there's a gigawatt. So we're talking about 3 gigawatts is the current size.
Yep.
Or if you talk about it with solar panels, again on that same road across from Wellington to Mudgee, you've got a solar farm there that's 200 megawatts.
Right.
So again, it's a pretty big area. You look out and you go, wow, a lot of solar panels there.
Yep.
Go next door to that, and the construction has started, but there's no solar panels there yet. They're just putting the pylons into the ground at this stage. And that's going to be a 400 megawatt solar farm.
Okay.
So go back a second. Think about that 200 megawatt solar farm, the one that's there now. So again, if you've got 5 of those, then you've got a gigawatt. So you get an idea of how big a gigawatt might look, how big some of those turbines. Now, the turbines that you're getting are getting larger. So the standard size now is around 3 megawatts per turbine, but larger turbines are being developed. You'll see 4 megawatts, 5 megawatts per turbine. There are larger ones that have been produced, but they're probably not in common production at this stage. And these, of course, are all ones onshore. Offshore ones are typically larger, but around the Wellington area, we're not talking about offshore, not a lot down the Macquarie River perhaps there. So it gives you an idea. One thing that's really important is that the area, as in the surface area of what's been declared for the renewable energy zone, is approximately 20,000 square kilometres, but that's not being proposed to change. So they're saying the area will stay the same, even though they'll increase the network capacity. What it will mean is you'll have more proponents doing it. The reason I get excited by this is when you start to talk about numbers. Now, in the media release, it says that the Central West Orana REZ would generate up to $10 billion in private investment in the region by 2030. And they say
That's a significant figure, isn't it?
That's a big number.
Unbelievable.
5,000 construction jobs at its peak.
Yes.
Now, we've already done some analysis from a council perspective because we know there are job shortages already. We've estimated over the next 5 years, there'll be a need for the Dubbo Regional Council, LGA, to have 6,000 additional jobs. But that's not just for the res, that's other projects. They're talking about 5,000 for the res, but the res also goes into Mudgee and Coonabarabran council areas, Midwestern Regional Council and Warrumbungle Shire Council, to be technically correct. So that 5,000 is across those three areas. Yeah. But again, I think that's probably
over the next 5 years, you say?
Well, they said by 2030.
Yeah, which is basically 5-7 years.
That's right. Yeah. But the reality is, and 2038 is not a bad time frame for stage 2 they're talking about there, because there's no doubt about it in my mind that there is 15 years, or I see anyway, 15 years of construction work that we'll see with this res. When someone's working on a project, they might need a few hundred for a certain project, and people have said to me, well, these renewable energy projects are no good. You only need the employees, the extra injection into the economy for a year or so while you're doing that project. And they're right for that project. But then there's another project and another project. So I think it wouldn't be surprising in 10 years' time to talk to someone who said, I came out to this area 10 years ago to work on that project over there. And then when that one finished, we went to that one, and then that one, and then that one.
It's like a builder moving from job site to job site. Sort of
it is. It's right.
Go from job site to job site.
You don't say, oh, no, there's no good having a builder because they've only got one house to build, and then once that's finished, they're done. Yeah. Well, there's another house to build. Yeah. And so it's a good analogy there. So you'll see this injection, and again, we've talked about all this money is transformational. For Wellington in particular, Dubbo's got a great economy. This will help Dubbo's economy, but this will transform Wellington's economy.
Well, actually, and picking up on that, from the point of view of infrastructure, you're talking here about a massive injection of people into this space, and professional people, a lot of these people are and well educated from the point of view of their area of expertise. Do we have the infrastructure in place right now to cater for this injection of we're talking 5,000 people?
No. In a word.
So is council looking at this as a priority from the point of view of how can we... You're talking about capitalising on this. So how does council going to capitalise on this?
It's a high priority for state and federal government and obviously for council as well. Now, we're not going to go and build a bunch of houses, but some of the plans for our expansion of various areas, so we talk about the Northwest Precinct from time to time, and that's an area that will expand in terms of housing. I know there are other builders, other developers trying to expand and basically accelerate their housing faster than normal. But we've also got some things that we're trying to do from a planning perspective. We want these people living in our communities. We don't want to see a mine site type environment set up outside Wellington and the people just live there and go to work and they're not coming in to the community. But one of the triggers that we might be able to pull is a temporary planning change. For example, there are shops down the main street of Wellington that are vacant. They might be owned by people who don't even live in Wellington. They've bought a retail premises or a business premises as an investment, and one day they'll get around to capitalising on that. In the meantime, it's sitting there, they're not spending money on it, and it's not being used. It doesn't look great for the main street of Wellington. But if we could do a temporary planning or temporary zoning change to allow people to live there, it's a retail shop, yes, but for 5 years, you're going to be able to live there. Or for 10 years, you can live there, and after that, the normal zoning that's in that applies. You can't live in a retail shop normally, but you can for a certain period of time.
Is that something that local council can do themselves, or does it have to go through some type of state government authority first?
We'll probably have to get some sort of permissions from the state around that, and I don't know for sure. I know it's one of the things that we're talking about, but I imagine that at some stage we'll have to get some approval because it's really about zoning we're talking about there, and the state government normally wants to have a bit of a say or at least be aware of that zoning. But what I'm picturing is the main street of Wellington potentially for 10 years might have people living in the main street. These shops as they are at the moment are improved. The landlords improve them because they know they've got a tenant there for the next 10 years.
Locked in for 10 years at least, yes.
And then after that, they say, well, I've done the work on that shop now. It's in better condition. Gee, I wonder if the population's improved enough. There's a bit more money around. Maybe I can get that leased out as a shop now as it was originally intended.
And so to energise that main space area as well, I'd say, like the main street and things like that. Yeah.
That's right. Put some vitality back into there to activate the main street. And then you've got people living in the main street. So that restaurant that you always wanted to open up, which wasn't going to quite make it with the number of people in the main street at night time, suddenly that now can work. So you've got a restaurant in the main street.
In thinking about that, so last week or the week before, we talked about with government, state government, and how we talk about the planning authorities. and how they look and project in regards to the growth of the areas. Are they taking this into consideration now in regards to what potentially Dubbo's going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years in Wellington?
Definitely not. No,
Yeah,
and that's one of those
disappointing,
issues.
isn't it?
Yeah, and as you talked about, I think it was last week, we talked about the fact that we'd been to meet with Paul Scully, the Minister for Planning, and that was one of the issues because, again, they look at things in a very pessimistic way. And when you've got an opportunity like this that will be exciting and already is exciting now, but will be transformational and really inject some population, then obviously that's going to change a whole range of things. But the planners sitting there in Sydney just look at some numbers and go, oh, well, it hasn't improved yet. And then everyone does, oh, look at that. We better do an increase in those numbers now because it looks like there's a bit of a bump on those numbers. So again, we've talked about the REC before, the Renewables Education and Activity Centre. That alone, if we can get that built and the visitation going through there again, that'll keep people coming through Wellington. So whole range of exciting opportunities. What I do like is 3 gigawatts was fine. That was always going to be okay. That was going to be good for our economy. 6 gigawatts is about twice as good. So that's fantastic as well. And I just think these sort of opportunities, we've just got to make sure we seize them in every possible way we can.
Absolutely. I know last week we talked about out there at the airport and with the Rural Fire Service out there, and they had that big conference and out there last week and with the aerial section. Well, the conferences keep on rolling, don't they? Because, of course, during the week we had the New South Wales Weeds Conference. Now, I know that probably doesn't sound quite as exciting as like an aerial sort of situation of Royal Flying Service, but I'm sure it would have been incredibly exciting for everyone involved in the Weeds Conference. But more particularly, the fact it brought another 300 people to Dubbo. That's what I get so excited about, I suggest, is that, again, we are a centre, we are a place that seems to drag in lots of people to these magnificent conferences. Yeah,
you're right. And the aerial firefighting conference that was on last week that we talked about, people from around the world came to that. There were about 270 people here. And again, there were at least 50 that came from overseas. I talked to some from America and some from the UK. That was fantastic. But don't downplay the 22nd New South Wales Biennial Weeds Conference. Now, of course, when you say a Weeds Conference, then people have some other images in their mind.
Yes.
And I did think about...
I was thinking about getting a T-shirt for the Weeds Conference, but I'm thinking I could go maybe up to Byron Bay area, that sort of thing, that type of way.
And I must admit, and I had to go along and welcome them to Dubbo and officially open the conference, and I did think about all the different jokes I could have about weeds.
I'm sure they would have all heard them.
Well, and I said that to them. I said, look, I've thought about 10 different jokes that I could say, but I guarantee that everyone in this audience has heard the jokes, so I'm not even going to try. I'm not going to try and be original because I don't think I am going to give you anything new here, so let's talk about it a bit more seriously. But you are spot on. There were probably 300 people here for this conference. There were people from other states. There were a couple of people from overseas as well, not as many as the large aerial, the aerial firefighting conference.
Yes.
But it's still this whole thing about continuing to roll over in the economy, continuing to inject money in the economy. Yeah. And that's probably our sweet spot. I reckon maybe 400 at the most is probably the most we can handle really well at a conference in Dubbo. If you've got 1,000 people for a conference, it's probably not our area. And people say, well, why don't you build something to accommodate that? But you're not going to get enough of them at that size to make it worthwhile, in my opinion. Whereas there are a lot of conferences around the 100 to say 300, maybe up to 400. A lot of those conferences, I get the lucky endeavour to be able to go along to many of these conferences and actually know that they're on, just because I've got to usually welcome people to Dubbo, whatever it might be. But you don't know about all these things happening, but it just keeps ticking over. Dubbo's central, easy to get to. We have got good conference facilities. We've got a large number of beds in terms of our hotels and motels, so that's all good. And just talking to people at this conference just before we went and did the official part of it, just talking to some people in general, they love the idea of coming to Dubbo. They're going to stay a couple of extra days. They're going to duck out to the zoo. It's always a big draw card. There's things for them to do. Apart from the weeds and the learning, there's all of these other ancillary activities.
It's exactly what you said, the old idea of the fact that little fish taste good. The more little fish we get in the sense of the conferences of the 150, the 200, the 400, whatever, it's wonderful for us because I'd imagine, and I drove down, the Main Street area around Cobra Street and that, every motel last week was booked out. So I'm assuming that they all must have stayed here in town locally and this sort of stuff. They would have gone off to the restaurants. We all benefit from that. So 400 people in a place like Dubbo is still a significant input.
It is. It's still significant. And you're right. With 5,000 beds, for example, they wouldn't have filled up all those beds, but we've got other tourists going through on a regular basis as well.
Yeah.
So it does certainly help the economy, but it just keeps ticking it over. And that's the important thing, I suppose. The important message from this is that all these little things add up to a really strong economy, but it's not a diversity. Even if we did have a really big conference centre that had 1,000 people come along, that might be a big part of your economy. But suddenly if you lose a major conference, or if that conference centre suddenly says we've got to do some refurb, we're going to close down for 6 months, the rest of the economy takes a big hit. The great strength of Dubbo is that we've got so much variety in all the different aspects to our economy. So you've got little conferences coming along, ticking away. You've got the retail sector. You've got the public service, the employment around that. You've got the education. So you've got all these different aspects that make up this economy, and that's what you want.
So predominantly, are most of these conferences being held through the DRTCC down there, or where else do they go to?
You've got the RSL Club.
Yes.
You've got the Rhino Lodge, which is owned by the RSL Club.
Yes.
You've got the DRTCC. Sometimes you've got even schools, for example, might run a conference that's very specific to education. So they might run something, it might only be 50 people there, but they might come and use the hall in school holidays, for example. There are a lot of facilities, when you start to sit back and think about it, a lot of facilities and a lot of people that can actually provide catering for these facilities. And then obviously motels, you've got rooms in motels. They try and keep them all that one motel that might be nearby, but that mightn't always be possible. But we've already talked about it before with the RFS, with all the people that stay at the RFS. So they can hold conferences out there and have 127 beds, for example, 124 it might be, I think, where people can stay out there. So you've got all these different avenues there. And again, it all just adds up to a really good outcome for our economy.
It's magnificent. Now, last Thursday night, Matt, you had a number of standing committees. You had to discuss some interesting little options that came up here. Now, just talk about very quickly, what is a standing committee again? Just to refresh our listeners what a standing committee is.
So we've got 3 standing committees that we have at Council, and the standing committees, it gives you the opportunity to discuss things in a less formal environment. So it looks and feels like a council meeting, but they're less formal. The rules of debate are a little bit different. You can have multiple goes at the debate during a standing committee meeting. Council meeting, you can only have one go at each topic. So little things like that. You can get larger presentations that people can come and give. It might be various experts or people from the public can come and give at standing committee meetings. And the idea is that you don't make decisions at standing committee meetings. You make recommendations, which then 2 weeks later go through to the council meeting for the final resolution. So it gives you a chance to debate something, to think about it, go away for a couple of weeks. People might give you some feedback from the community, and then a final resolution is made.
So is there a set agenda for each standing committee, or can you bring new agenda items to it?
The new agenda items are brought. There are some fairly standard items in there, but there's 3 different standing committees. The Infrastructure, Planning and Environment Committee is one standing committee. And again, the name kind of gives you an idea of what the standing committee is about. The other, and Josh Black is the chairman of that particular standing committee.
Right.
There's the Culture and Community Committee, and Jess Goff is the chairperson of that particular committee. And then you've got the Corporate Services Committee, and Damien Mann is the chairperson of that particular committee. Right. So again, the names give you an indication of the topics that might come through each of those 3 committees.
So speaking of infrastructure, it looks as though at the infrastructure meeting there, you spoke about Saxa Road and the Comobella crossing. So what's happening there?
Yeah, so this is one that we've been working on for some time. The Comobella crossing in the past has been...
Comobella. I say Comobella. There is Comobella.
Comobella is what I've normally heard the locals talk about.
You say potato, I say potato.
That's right. So it's a crossing that essentially was a culvert in creek, Mitchell Creek it's in. And that's been serving mainly its purpose for decades now. But with all the flooding that we've had over the last year, it got to the point where that was crumbling apart. There's a very temporary process that goes next door to that where you're kind of going through the creek bed a bit.
Yeah, that sounds exciting if you want to be four-wheel driving or something.
Oh, yeah, we had to get permission from the fisheries to actually have that allowed as a crossing.
Okay, yes.
So it's not great. We've actually said to the community out there, yes, we've heard you, this isn't good enough. We need to do something better than this. And this is the tricky part. So the recommendation we had to make at the committee meeting on Thursday night was about where we're going to go to next with this. We could spend a little bit of money, not much. Basically, it would be basically covered by the floods recovery process from the state government if we just said, let's put back what was there before. that process might have cost around about $470,000,
Right.
and we'd pretty much get that covered by the state government. So the net cost to council would be pretty minimal.
Yeah.
I want to say zero, but it wouldn't be quite zero. There'd be
Is it
some little
going to
cost.
fix the problem, though?
Well, it will fix the problem in dry times.
Yes.
And,
What happens if floods again? We're back to square one again, or?
and they might have a flood once every 10 years, say, but it's a crossing that's not great. We've been out to the hall out there and we've talked to the community and we've said we need to work on a better solution. Now, everyone we talked to in state government, both the last state government and the new one, talks about betterment. When you're recovering from a flood, we think it's worthwhile to make things better so that it can withstand the next flood in better condition.
Let me guess. This is like the old insurance claim scenario. Is that right, in the sense that it will only give you enough money to cover what is currently in existence?
That's exactly right. But the governments, both the governments have said, if you can put an argument to say that by making it better, it's going to save us money in the long run, then we'll listen to that. In the past, no. So the state government would say, that bridge or that culvert you had there, 470, you replace that culvert, you get 470. You put something else there, we'll probably give you nothing. So that's a challenge.
So what the new government is prepared to turn around and offer more money for this, based on their betterment programming?
Correct. The last government said that they were working on betterment, and the new government has said the same thing, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a guarantee. When you fix something that was damaged by a flood, for example, then you're not guaranteed the money, but you're pretty much assured the money will be there to put back what was there. Betterment funding, you've got to go through a process to try and get some of the betterment funding. And in this particular scenario, we don't want to hold up this process because we think it's in bad enough condition and the local residents have put up with it for long enough. Having said that, there are a lot of other people. It's a regional road. There are a lot of other people that use this particular road as well when it's in good condition. So it's a bit unfair on Dubbo Regional Council
So the proposal as it
residents.
currently stands is the fact that the Standing Committee has recommended that it's fixed back up to its standard it was. Is that right? Spending the $470,000, whatever it is?
No, so that was part of the debate on Thursday night.
Okay, so it didn't
but
get to that
then
stage.
we got to the stage of saying, no, we think the community deserves better out there, despite the fact it's a valid argument to say, why are the residents of Dubbo Regional Council paying for this when people outside the LGA are using this road more than people inside the LGA? But again, it's an important regional road and we're pretty confident we'll get some money from the state government for it. But despite that, we'll go ahead and do something. Part of the debate was the type of bridge that we would use to replace it. So you've got modular proprietary bridge, and so that's basically something like a Meccano set. I mean, overly simplistic
Like
here.
a sort of drop it in sort of thing for
Well,
it,
no, you
or?
buy the bits and then you get someone else to come along and put it together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair
So
enough.
that's one option
Yeah.
for a bridge.
Is
Another
that
one.
the cheapest option? Or is
No, it wasn't actually. Another option is to do big box culverts. So you'd often, or not often, you'd sometimes put a culvert in to get some water flowing through an area.
Yep.
This is with big culverts, and you put them in, and that basically forms the basis of your bridge. The culvert, so water can still flow through, and then you put a deck on top, and you've got a bridge.
I think we might have one of those out of Firgrove.
You've got
Yes.
a very small version of one of
Yes,
those.
yes,
That's exactly
okay,
right.
I know what that is now, yes.
So think about that one you've got at Firgrove,
Yes.
and double the height, for example,
Yeah, right,
and make
okay.
it a fair bit longer, and you've probably got something that you might see
right.
there. That one is cheaper.
Yes,
Definitely
right, okay.
cheaper.
And effective, it works.
Well, that's right. Will it work bigger? Yes, it will. But again, a couple of little interesting parts around that. And the third one would be a normal design and construction. So you'd go to tender and say, we need a bridge to go from there to there. You do the design, you construct it, tell us how much you're going to charge us to do that, and we'll tell you whether you get the tender or not. Councillors on Thursday night, in their recommendation to council, said let's forget about option one.
Yep.
The modular bridge doesn't sound like it's going to be a great solution because the person installing it says, there's a problem with the bits you bought over there. The person who you bought the bits off goes, no, the installer doesn't know what they're doing.
Yes, okay.
We didn't think that'd be a great option.
No.
The culvert, we thought that sounded pretty good because it was about close enough to $1 million cheaper than the design construct. So we're talking about maybe $2.7 million for a design and construct, 1.65.
And tends to go in pretty quickly. It is my experience what happened out there at Firgrove, I know.
Yes, except at the moment, there's a huge delay on the larger box culverts.
Is that right?
So there's about 20 weeks. So if we ordered some box culverts today, like smaller box culverts you can get,
Yep.
the larger ones we'd need out there, if we order them today, it's 20 weeks
Is that
before
right?
we'd even see them turn up, before we even start the job.
Oh, goodness me.
So, yes, I normally would have said you're spot on that they are quicker.
Yes.
But the approximation, again, this is in our staff report that went through to the committees, 54 weeks for box culvert solution, 57 weeks for design and construct, so pretty much the same. But the 1.65 million versus the 2.7 million is attractive. There's a little bit more roadworks that's needed for the box culvert on the approaches as opposed to the bridge, but still that's probably going to be cheaper there. So what council recommended in the end was, rather than restrict ourselves, the sensible thing to do would be to go out to tender and say, we'll accept a tender for a design and construct or a box culvert. So if your specialty is box culverts, put the tender in.
Yep.
Give us your price, give us your time frame.
Yeah.
If your specialty is design and construct, then put that in. If you could do both, put 2 tenders in. So that way, councillors believed they're not going to miss out on the best option, rather than picking now, based on a staff report, exactly which way they want to go. Bottom line is, it's still over a year away before we'll get that.
Is there anything happening
solved.
out at Saxa Road before then? Is there any sort of temporary measures that the council can actually do now? Or
Only that little creek crossing that goes down beside the current culvert, which is pretty hairy going
keep
through
your
there.
four-wheel drive skills up for a while yet.
Yeah, that's right. And cars can go across, but we're really trying to keep large vehicles, trucks, that type of thing, non-local traffic off that area there. So we were hoping to have it done sooner, but it's going to take some time. And in the meantime, we'll do it if we get the money from the state government or not, but we're really focused hard on that betterment process.
Now, I know a couple of podcasts, Matt, we announced the fact that Belgravia is taking over the running of the Dubbo Aquatic Centre, or not just the Dubbo Aquatic Centre, the Dubbo Regional Aquatic Centre, of course, which is Wellington, Geary and Dubbo. Now, at one of the standing committee meetings there during the week, it looks like representatives turned up to have a chat. So what do they have to say?
We have a Dubbo Aquatic Centre working party, and that's got representatives from council staff, from councillors, swimming groups that are on there, and they talk about various things in relation to the pools and where they're headed and various proposals, etc. But Belgravia, a representative from Belgravia, came along to that meeting. Now, they don't take over. The pool isn't open for the summer yet, but obviously they're getting ready to take over and getting their staff employed. They're probably advertising out now. I haven't seen any, but I'm sure they're out there advertising for staff, etc. But they thought it was important to come along and meet some of the staff and, well, they've already met some of the staff, but some of the councillors, some of the actual swimming clubs themselves.
Okay.
And I wasn't at that particular meeting, but certainly the feedback from that meeting was very much that Belgravia are very invested in good outcomes for the people that use the pool. And they really stressed that at that meeting, in the discussion we had on Thursday night around that particular meeting. They really stressed that. And sure, they've got an amount they're being paid. They've got a contract in place to go and do a job. But I think people were impressed with how focused they are on doing an exceptional job.
That's good.
And they want to increase the visitation. They want to do an exceptional job. They want to have other pools around the nation have contracts and say, hey, use Belgravia because they do a great job. They really want to make sure that those swimming clubs are happy, that the users of the pool are happy. So it'll be an interesting process. The pool has been out in external hands before, and I think it did a fine job in that scenario.
Yes.
And again, this is a different company with a whole lot more expertise, so hopefully we'll get some great outcomes.
Have there been any questions, I suppose, raised back to council in regards to Belgravia taking over? Has anyone come to council with any concerns in regards to Belgravia taking over?
I haven't heard any, and not everyone comes to me for every problem, but certainly I haven't heard any issues or any complaints around that. It's probably more likely that people will have some issues if they take it over and something doesn't work the way they want it to, or they see some experience which isn't perfect or ideal. We'll probably hear more once they actually take over and start the management process. But at this stage, the information we talked about, the fact that we're going to save money by doing it externally, and there was a competitive process and people put it in. And so I think people trust the fact that councillors were going to do the best thing for the community. That's part of our job. That's part of what it says in the Local Government Act.
That's right.
You're meant to do the best you can for the community. So I think people are pretty comfortable with that, but let's wait and see when the season starts.
Well, so they take over basically for this summer. They're pretty much going to kick off around, September or something? Is that how it kicks off? Or?
When the pool opens, that's right, when the 3 pools open. Technically, the contract starts on the 1st of July, but obviously we don't open the pool on the 1st of July. But yeah, basically from this season on, away they go, and it'll be interesting to see how they go. Look, I've got confidence in the decision that council has made, and I've got confidence in them doing a good job. I'm a bit excited to see what they can do, to see if they can improve.
Well, they're a multinational operation, aren't they? Like this isn't their only operation. They're all over the place, aren't they?
No, that's right. They're in Australia and New Zealand are the ones that I know about. I don't know about anywhere else, but certainly they've got a number of pools under management. So you hope they've learnt the process and what to do at some other pools, and we're not a guinea pig. We hope we're at the end of the line being a polished process.
I love the way you put that. Australia Day. Now, this year, Matt, on Australia Day, we had a little bit of a change. Wellington we had the night time before, so that was on the 25th of January. We had the celebrations. Dubbo, 26th of January, stayed the same day. Has there been a proposal put forward here in regards to changing the Dubbo Australia Day to the 25th? Did this come up at the part of the standing committee meeting, or is that what's happened there?
Yeah, you're spot on. And when we did the Wellington and Dubbo, or not really a Dubbo change, a subtle change with Dubbo, but when we changed the actual timing of the Wellington one, for example, at the time we would have changed Dubbo and Wellington, I think. I mean, it would have been a council decision, but I got the mood from the councillors that they would have probably changed both. But of course we weren't allowed to. We actually approached the Department of Home Affairs, and the message that we got was that you can't have a citizenship ceremony on any other day but the 26th of January as part of your Australia Day celebrations.
Right.
Can you do it, have an Australia Day the night before and then citizenship? No, you couldn't. You had to, if you had citizens that were going to, or people that were going to be conferred as new citizens around that date.
They had to be on Australia Day.
Had to be on the 26th. Now, so we argued the toss a little bit for a few months with the Department of Home Affairs. We got a negative. So Wellington didn't have any conferees for the date, so we could change that, but we couldn't change Dubbo. Subsequently to that, with a couple of weeks' notice before Australia Day, Andrew Giles, the Minister for Immigration, Citizenship and Multicultural Affairs, made an announcement that you could hold your event up to 6 days before the 26th or 6 days after the 26th.
Right, yes,
so that was fantastic.
Like the 12 days of Christmas.
Exactly right.
There it is.
But it was too late. We'd
Yes.
already put our plans in place. Everything was happening. So we said, great, we'll do that this year. We'll do a survey and we'll come back and then decide what we do for 2024 after that. The survey's been done now. People in the community have been asked. Dubbo and Wellington people have been asked. And so that information came to council for a decision to be made around what do you want to do for
That's just on the
2024.
survey results. So that's an interesting one. So what was the general feedback from the survey?
Well, not as strong as I would have liked, and that
Okay.
probably made it a bit tougher for councillors. And here's an interesting philosophical question. When you go out to the community and say, please complete this survey, do you base your entire decision on the survey results, or do you use that as part of the process in making a decision? Now, keep in mind that we've got 55,000 people in Dubbo and Wellington. 109 people completed the survey.
Okay.
Now, you still can get a good representation for what a community wants out of a small sample space, but it's not a huge sample space for something that's pretty important, obviously. So it's one of those things. You want to listen to the community, but if everything you did was by survey and that's all you did, then forget about councillors. You just have an electronic referendum type process where you just vote on every decision of council for the broader public, and that's how you make decisions. One of the interesting philosophical points of view that I put forward for a democratically elected group, state, federal, local, whichever level you want to pick, what you're doing is you're really saying we're entrusting you, our elected representative, to read all the information, to be absorbed in the information, to talk to people, to meet with people, to understand the information and listen to feedback. And with all of that information, make the best decision for the community.
Make a decision. That's it.
That's right. So in this scenario, the feedback that came back from the community was very different in the Wellington community and the Dubbo community.
Okay.
And I'd say part of that reason was that you had the Wellington community with the experience of having a different day, and the Dubbo community didn't have a different day.
So the Wellington community were generally quite happy with the 25th as an evening?
Not quite.
Okay, so it's the opposite way.
No. They were happier than Dubbo, but they still weren't overwhelmed. So, for example, in Wellington, 33% of people said they preferred the event the night before.
Right.
63% said the day of, and we had some other options as well. But so basically 2/3 said do it on the 26th, 1/3 said do it the night before. So
how many people we have there, though? What was our number of Wellington people who do we actually know the breakdown there of how many people in Wellington actually out of those figures were the ones? Was it 100 people? Was it 20 people? 30 people?
109 people in total responded to the survey. 31.2% from Wellington, 62.4% from Dubbo, so 31.2% of 109, so a little bit over 30, probably 34 with a quick calculation there, and 6.4% from other areas as well.
Oh.
Yeah, so people from other areas
want to contribute as well. Good on them.
So effectively, when you've got those numbers there, then you look at that and you say, well, it's obvious the community doesn't want it the night before, so let's put it there. But again, your point, you've only got 30 or so people who are actually voting on that. Do we base our entire decision for that community on that?
People,
Now, in Dubbo, it was a little bit different.
Right.
Only 6.7% of people said they wanted it on the 25th.
Right.
87% said they wanted it on Australia Day, and there were 4.5% that said they wanted it on the nearest Saturday, for example.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So again, in Dubbo, they didn't really have the opportunity to experience that.
Yep.
So here's the tough question that councillors had to face on Thursday night. We've got the survey results. They're not overwhelming in support of the day before. In Dubbo in particular, but in Wellington it was okay. You take that information and then you look at what we were trying to do. What we were trying to achieve was we wanted to say we want the community more unified. We want the community to be at one with our Aboriginal past and our current environment that we have with a melting pot, including people from all over the world. You've got Aboriginal people going back 65,000 years. You've got settlement going back to 1788. You've then got people that have been here for 5 minutes. We want that melting pot of all these people together in one big happy family. And the idea, councillors spoke about it when we made the decision previously, was to say we recognise the 26th, and the 26th is still an important day in the history of this nation. Let's not forget that. But we also recognise the fact that it's painful for some Aboriginal people. So when we want our community to come together, having an event on the 26th maybe isn't the best. The night before, well, it still recognises the date is significant, but it just gives Aboriginal people the chance to come along. In Wellington, there was a large Aboriginal crowd there at the event.
Is that interesting? Okay.
In the past, on Australia Day, because obviously some people call it Survival Day, in the past you might have had very few Aboriginal people there. So I think that was a bit of an indicator to me that, hey, we're on the right track.
I think it's interesting too, and it's worthwhile the discussion because, look, we're prepared to change the at least one word out of our national anthem to try to become more encompassing of all folks. It's interesting too when we're looking at, say, Australia Day, are we focusing here, and this has always been, I think, part of the current debate of the discussion, should we be focusing more on the actual nature of what the day should be celebrating as opposed to the date? You know what I mean? Like, this is part of the reason I suggest maybe why council, and I suggest Dubbo City Council, Dubbo Regional City Council will be one of many, I think will be having this discussion to say the fact that, look, if we move it 1 day or 2 days, and now, of course, the Minister said, well, you've got 12 days to play in here if you want to. It's almost like they're saying to everybody now, look, play around with this. It's Australia Day from the point of view of the celebration. Let's celebrate Australia as a nation. If we can move away from the nature of the date of the 26th of January, and as you say, there's a lot of mixed emotions around that date. If we can take it away from that and focus on what it should be trying to represent, isn't that really what we should be trying to achieve?
And I think you hit the nail on the head that what we want to do is say, isn't this a great country? Isn't it great to be here in Australia? It's fantastic. I was very careful in my language when we talked about the 2023 event that I didn't say the word celebrate. In the same way that you might have Anzac Day or Remembrance Day, you don't really call it a Remembrance Day celebration because what you're really doing is acknowledging and recognising what happened on Remembrance Day or what happened on Anzac Day, and a lot of people died. And so with that same thought in my mind, without going and doing exhaustive consultation with the Aboriginal community, I thought the word celebration, if we're trying to bring the entire community along together, was the wrong word to use. So I started talking about it being a recognition of what a great nation Australia is now, recognition of Australia Day, because you can still be someone who is not happy with what happened and the way it happened on Australia Day, the reason we have Australia Day, but you can still recognise the day. So you might want to celebrate that you feel that your country was invaded or that your group survived. You might want to celebrate that, but you can recognise that. So for all of those reasons, that was where we came about. And it was a fascinating discussion that we had. And the community, we had lots of feedback from the community. So
what was the end result then? And we've sort of talked philosophically about it. So at the end of the day, what was the end result?
Well, it was interesting because we had one councillor away on Thursday night. And so in the end, the debate went back and forth. And the idea of having both events was the first proposal put forward, both events the day before. So the evening before, 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, the 25th of January, 2024.
So that was the proposal put forward?
That was the proposal put forward by one of our councillors, and you had the next 3 days to just go on a long weekend. Luckily, Australia Day lands on a Friday next year, so you had the 3 days to go and do that. That was debated back and forth a fair bit, and we had something that's not that common in council meetings. We had a foreshadowed emotion. One councillor said, I want to put a motion up and I was chairing this meeting. I don't normally chair this meeting, but Damien Marm was coming in by video conference. I was chairing it. And so the motion wouldn't have been allowed. The councillor that put this foreshadowed motion forward was smart enough to realise that it wouldn't be allowed because it was part of it was a direct negative of one of those. But you can foreshadow a motion, and that means that you're saying to the rest of your councillors, if you defeat this current motion in front of you, then I've got something that they'll put in its place. You can't have it debated during the process because it would be a direct negative. So in other words, it would be, I want to paint the wall black, and someone else says, well, I move an amendment, we paint it white. Well, hold on, you can't have those two there, complete opposites.
Yep. You're voting on one thing, not both.
Correct. Yep. So the first proposal put forward, the first motion put forward was both events the night before. And that was debated back and forth. In the end, the vote went 5-4 against.
Right. So to stay with the 26th of January here in Dubbo?
Well, no, that means there's no motion there.
Oh.
So we've got no decision made at this stage. But because one of the councillors had foreshadowed a motion, then after that was defeated, then that motion comes forward.
Right.
That councillor then says, right, I've now got a motion. And the motion was to do it the same in 2024 as was done in 2023.
Oh, I get you now. Okay, so now I see. So because, of course, it didn't – because, of course, the motion was about saying let's put them both on the night before.
Correct.
So, therefore, if it goes down 5-4 on that, there's no motion put forward up until the foreshadowing motion to keep it as is.
Correct. So
gotcha.
Then the motion put forward, the foreshadowed motion, which now could become the motion, was put forward to say let's have Wellington Australia Day the night before and let's have Australia Day in Dubbo on the day of, on the 26th.
Right.
And so that was debated back and forth. In the end, the vote was 7-2 in favour of that.
Right.
So that then becomes the recommendation that will go through to council in 2 weeks' time. Now, the reason we have talked about it for some time, but the reason I really like to talk about it and get it out there in the community is because, and it was mentioned at the council meeting, there's 2 weeks now. The community's got 2 weeks to talk to councillors, to send their views, to ring them up, send them an email, whatever, and have a discussion about it and tell the councillors what you think about that, because in 2 weeks' time at the council meeting, that's when it will be the final resolution as to exactly what happens on Australia Day.
Because, of course, right now it's just a recommendation.
Correct. That's right. So, again, one of the things that's good about the committee meetings is the recommendations will often be similar, especially when it's a unanimous vote, often be similar to what comes through to council. When it's a bit tighter and it's a bit like this one, then a few phone calls to some councillors might change their mind, change their opinion on that.
Yes. Now, speaking of all things council-based and things like that, I'm noticing here that your mayoral memo during the week discussed the nature of the role of the councillor and the mayor, or more particularly, what entails the job description of both. That's interesting. So talk me through it. What are the job descriptors of being a councillor?
Well, there isn't one, and that's the problem. There's no job description as such.
Right.
And I know in our modern...
You guys get a job description as well as a mayor?
Well, no, and I'll get to that. I'll do the best I can to tell you.
Make it up as you go along, sort of thing.
Well, sometimes I'm sure some do. But it is interesting because in our modern employment framework, the job description is incredibly important. And I don't know any employees that would say we don't have a job description in our job. Yeah. It's really important.
Normally when you apply for a job, you have to sort of refer to your job descriptions as part of the reasons why you're applying. You've got to answer these certain questions based on those. Yeah,
so it's interesting. But in council, the best I can find is... And I do talk about the Local Government Act a little bit. It is my go-to because, again, that's
where you work. It's part of the whole deal, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's what we act under. And in that, you have got 106 words that describe the role of a councillor. If you look at Section 232. Yeah, not much, is it?
No.
So Section 232 for the people that want to read that. Yeah. And the mayor's role is under Section 226. That's 234 words. So again,
wow, so you get a double up.
Yeah, not a lot, but something that gives you some idea.
Yes.
Now, it's the best. It's not really a job description. It says the roles of the mayor, but you might follow that. One of those roles, which is interesting, and it has been over the last few weeks for a few activities I've been undertaking, if you look at Part M of Section 226, it says that the role of the mayor is, and I quote, to represent the council on regional organisations and at intergovernmental forums at regional, state and Commonwealth level.
Oh, well, you do that.
Well, and that's exactly right. I do that, and I think it is an important part of it. And I think one of the things that you look at is there any benefit to the community? Is there any reason you would do that? Long gone are the days, thankfully, where you knocked on a minister's door and said, hey, buddy, I've got this great little project, sure thing, we'll give that the green light and away it goes. And when I say long gone are those days.
I've seen a little bit of New South Wales state government. Certain premiers have gone down for some things like that, haven't they?
Well, and that was the point I was going to make. Maybe it still does happen here and there,
yes.
but people get found out. And Darryl Maguire, obviously, that probably was the way some of those funding processes
Unfortunately,
occurred.
true, yes.
What everyone wants is a much fairer, more open process. But again, being involved in those various forums and learning and understanding things. And again, I have an example from my previous time as mayor. We were trying to get about $3.5 million in funding from the federal government for Barden Park.
Right.
We had $1.27 million from the state. We had $535,000 from us. And we put an application in for $3.47 from the feds. And we missed out. And so we're a bit disappointed, and we thought, that's not great. What are we going to do about it? We could have packed up our bat and ball and said, well, we'll move on to another project.
Yep.
But what we did is I actually went to Simon Crean's office in Canberra, and I didn't sit down with Simon Crean. I sat down with his staff, and I said, look, we thought this was a really good project. We thought it was ticked all the boxes. It was going to be a great regional process. Where did we get it wrong? What can we do? There's going to be another round of this funding. Help us out here.
Yeah.
And we learned a few things during that process. One thing that I certainly learned was that the person we were dealing with that was making the initial recommendation for this to the minister was a person that had grown up overseas, had spent not a long time in Australia and didn't really understand the nature of regional areas. When we talked about Barden Park being a great facility for people from the region, from the Burks, the Brewarrnas, the Cobars, all sorts of places, he initially thought that they'd go to their own athletics track.
Of course, they have plenty of those out there.
Why wouldn't they go to those instead of coming all the way into Dubbo?
As you say, no idea.
No. He did talk about the fact that he did understand regional because he'd been from Canberra to Cowra for a wine weekend, so he got regional. And
that's how you do it, don't you?
That's right. And I did want to get him out to our real region, but in the end, we got a map out and showed him a few things there. And what we learned from that process was that we had to do a couple of things. We had to do a business case, spend some money on a business case. Before that, it had been an application by our staff to demonstrate some of the things that were bleedingly obvious to us, but the business case for the regional involvement of people around the region, and also just demonstrate the lack of facilities elsewhere, how this would be used by the region. It wasn't a Dubbo facility, it was a regional facility. So again, we got an understanding where he was at. We went away, did the business case, put the application in. Of course, we got that $3.47 million, and we've now got that wonderful facility that we've got there.
The thing I find that really interesting about that story, Matt, is that the learning curve. And you say the fact that there's no real job descriptions set aside there for the mayors and for the councillors, but along the way you have to learn all of this. This is part of that rapid learning curve, I'd suggest, that anyone who goes into local government is going to have to experience pretty quickly. So therefore, to go down to Canberra and to meet people who are in the federal government and go down to Sydney to meet people in state government and have those conversations, boy, oh boy, you cannot buy that from the point of view of experience in that. That's something they have to just go and do yourself, don't you?
Well, you do, but I was lucky when I first got on the council that we had two people that I was served under as mayor, if you like. We had both Alan Smith and Greg Matthews. And so you're learning from them, you're listening. I think it'd be very difficult for anyone, and I've met some people who have done it in the past, I know some people right now, that they get elected to council and then go straight into the mayor's role immediately. So they're basically first down the job and they're a councillor and then they're a mayor. And you can still do the job. I'm not saying that it's not a possibility to do the job, but you've got to learn all those things from scratch. Whereas I know when I came along as mayor, I already had about 7 years worth of experience, again, under Greg and under Alan. So I had a fairly good understanding of a lot of those things, and you knew a lot of those things. So it wasn't like, oh, what, I've got to go to Sydney.
The mentorship sort of thing happening there.
Well, I suppose to a certain extent it is. But you also watch what they do and learn from other people, and then you can apply your learnings from that to then your role. And you shape it and develop it as you go forward, but you've still done some of that beforehand. So I think that's fine, but again, it is interesting. People, I maybe bore people a little bit sometimes when I refer to the Act a bit, but that is our Bible. That's it's not just our job description for our little parts of it, but everything that happens when people say, can you fix the Reserve Bank interest rate? I go, the Government Act, and I can't find anywhere that it gives us the power to do that. So that's the sort of thing that I do.
When you work out how to do that, mate, let me know first, will you? Now, speaking of Canberra, you went to Canberra during the week. You flew down there and you attended the Regional Capitals Australian Board meeting. Now, the Regional Capitals Australia, that's a group that you're part of, and there was a board meeting down in Canberra with this group. So I suppose, look, the first most obvious question, I know you have lots and lots of different groups that you attend and be part of, but this group, I don't think I've come across them yet. The Regional Capitals Australia Group, who are they?
So it's a group that's been put together many years ago, and the whole idea is that if you look at the regional capitals across the nation, then they're comparable to a Sydney or a Melbourne. So to give you an idea, there's 51 regional capitals, identified regional capitals. Okay. So Dubbo is obviously one of those. Yep. And we're talking about cities. We're talking about these places that
have to be above a certain amount of population, or?
Well, they've got to be a city for a start.
Yep.
But they also need to be acting in some way in their region as the local capital. And it's a pretty easy example to give for Dubbo, where we've got people in Walgett and Canberra and Gilgandra and Narromine who gravitate to Dubbo for their larger services or their health facilities, and it's a natural place for them to go as their capital. The same as we might go to Sydney as our state capital, people come to Dubbo as their regional capital. So think about that, replicated in 51 places across the nation.
Yeah, right.
But when you look at the population, you've got a home of those 51 capitals of about 4 million people. So it's not quite a Sydney or a Melbourne, but you can see the point of it, that you put all them together and you've got a Sydney or a Melbourne influence, if you like. Now, one of the things that we've talked about in the past with regional capitals is that we don't get the same amount of money spent across all of those from the federal government as they might spend on a Sydney or a Melbourne.
Yes.
So the expenditure on those cities in one location is more than the expenditure on those 51. So that's one of the things we often lobby for. But we've got some different things in there in terms of, we believe, the value to the community, to the overall nation, if you like. $225 billion those capitals contribute to the annual GDP.
Wow, okay.
But we've also got a more relaxed lifestyle and low congestion and affordable living. So there's advantages to them. But we will get together and decide on policy positions, and then sometimes also get together with pollies. So that was the board meeting we had in Canberra.
So you're part of the board of this group, are you?
Correct. So there's 21 cities that actually pay to be a member of this.
Right.
There are 51 identified capitals. Some of the other ones say we're happy for the other ones to carry the load and pay the money.
Yes. Yes.
So they're not all members, but then you've got a board
Yep.
that's elected from that. So I'm on the board there. And so we have board meetings. But again, the main thing from that is to have policy positions that are common across many of those cities, not all of them, because you're hard pressed to find something that's in common with all 51, but you might have a policy position. So, for example, we talked about airports at the board meeting during the week, and our policy position around that, around funding of airports. Not all 51 of the cities have an airport that's got regular passenger traffic, RPT, going to all of those cities.
Okay.
But a number of them do have. And when some of the funding has been removed, some of the funding programs have been removed, many of those councils own those airports, and so we see that as a bad thing. So we've got a policy document on trying to get additional funding for airports as one example. But it's, again, things that we can then go and pitch to pollies. So that board meeting was on during the week. Sometimes we'll have those via video conference, but this particular week we went across to Canberra for that board meeting.
Excellent. Now, while you were down there, as part of the board meeting, you caught up with the Senator, the Honourable Jenny McAllister, the Assistant Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Now, of course, I would imagine what's happening with the res out here, she would be a very interesting person to speak to. I'm sure she'll be interested in speaking to you as well, I would suggest.
You're actually right. I was pretty impressed with Jenny. I haven't met her before, so it was the first meeting with Jenny. Now, we did meet with Regional Capitals Australia, so we had 4 mayors that went along and met with Jenny, and typically you'll have your CEO and GMs there as well. So we went along and met with Jenny. Now, not every one of those 51 capitals has some form of renewable energy or some impact from renewable energy around there. So again, it's one of those things that you're trying to talk for the group, but also using some local examples. Yeah. But that was a really important contact, really important meeting just for Jenny to get an understanding of where we're at, because sometimes pollies get a bit beat up by renewable energy and they hear the negative side or the people complaining and think that's what everyone out there. And so when we spoke and said, we've got some differences in these cities, but certainly from our res, we're very positive about it, and you could see Jenny's eyes almost light up going, it's fantastic. Yeah. One question I did put to Jenny, and this is where it's this great concept of being able to sit down and talk to people. Again, I didn't say, hey, can you give us some money? She said, sure thing, here's a couple of $1 million for a project, Matt, have a nice day. But one thing that I did want to understand is that the federal government has a focus on electrifying our nation, changing where we get our power from. That's been a big focus from an election perspective and from a government perspective. But our dealings are typically with the state. The RESs are state-based. And it's not just New South Wales that has the concept of the RES and producing power in that way. So I want to know from Jenny where the federal government fits in and where the state government fits in.
And how they can maybe support us in regards to infrastructure and catering for the people who are going to be here and all the normal sort of stuff and grants and
all of that. All of that. That's exactly right. And I'll talk. You've got another topic I think you're going to talk to me about or ask me about another meeting I had with the department. I'll talk more about it there. But it's that sort of thing where you can have those discussions and find out where they sit. So you know, for example, if there was a funding program or if there's an idea, you know where to pitch that idea, you know where to talk to that idea about. So it's those sort of important meetings that you have to try and really work out where their headspace is, and then you can pitch to that knowing that with a lot more information.
Well, I can imagine, I know you're here as part of the board for this group, but I'd imagine you've probably got your Dubbo cap on this part of this discussion with her as well, thinking along the lines of, well, hey, listen, we're central to the emergence of renewable energy here in Australia. At our zone here, our area here, this is a central part, has been allocated and set up here as being one of those great areas of growth. What's the federal government's take on that? Do they look at us and go, you guys are really important to us, therefore we should be looking after you a little bit more?
The interesting part of that discussion was that the federal government probably is not getting down to individual council areas. They're really looking at things at a big picture. But some of our experiences, which I'll again talk about more in a little while, some of our experiences can feed into them and help them with their processes in terms of how they can make the whole energy transition work better. So yes, you're wearing your Dubbo cap. I'm also focused on the fact that I'm representing RCA as well as Dubbo. So you're trying to talk about things at a bigger picture, but having those examples at the local council level absolutely helps and helps with that relationship ongoing.
Well, speaking of which, this sort of may lead into the discussion that we talk about there in regards to Catherine King, the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. Now, we've just sort of talked here about the whole need for extra infrastructure happening here in our region, particularly with the intended and expected growth from the point of view of the employees coming into this area to cater and to build this huge, big energy zone, renewable energy zone. In talking here to the Minister King, in regards to it, what's her take in regards to all of that? Does she see the need for more infrastructure out this way?
Absolutely, but it all comes down to dollars, of course.
Yes. Is she prepared to open up the purse?
Well, it's interesting because we were told before the meeting that if anyone comes in and pitches for funding, the meeting will be shut down.
Oh, really?
And so we were all forewarned, so no one went in there and said, hey, I've got this project, can you fund that?
I wish I could do that with some of the meetings. You can't talk about this with me.
One of the things, though, that she did talk about was that gone are the days. No one mentioned it, but she brought up the topic in general discussion. Gone are the days where someone gets some funding based on the colour that their electorate is on a spreadsheet, obviously, with reference back to the last government.
Red or the blue, yes.
Exactly. Now, she did say, and everyone in the room agreed, she did say that projects should be given money based on merit. Projects should be given money based on the benefit to the community. This is public money we're dealing with. It shouldn't be on you've got the right member in your electorate or we know Billy, he's a good guy, let's give him some money. Yeah. And so that was music to all of our ears because we think from regional capital's perspective, we've got some really good projects and we stack up with a lot of merit. So if you do it on merit, then that should be good for all of our capitals. So that's fantastic. And for Dubbo as well. One of the projects that we've got an application in for at the moment is the Rotary Cultural Tourism Centre that we've talked about. Yes. So that's one of the funds that is referenced there. So if I had have said, hey, by the way, we've got an application in for Rotary Cultural Tourism, can you give us some money for it?
She'd say, get out.
Well, she'd either say get out or say that's the end of the meeting.
Is that right?
Yeah. So, and again, I'm not saying that in a bad way. I have a lot of respect for Catherine because we were told not to talk about that beforehand because the last thing you want is people coming in there pitching their individual ideas to the minister because you've got the staff, you've got a process there. One thing I did like, though, and this was based on feedback from Regional Capitals Australia previously over previous years, we gave the federal government some feedback to say that often it's not worth putting in a funding application because it's too expensive to put the application in, which sounds ridiculous, but some of the requirements they have is, or they're too onerous.
Yes.
They need business cases. They need survey data. They need a whole range of information. It might cost you $100,000 to put an application.
There's a lot of council out there that'll probably struggle to pay that.
Well, and again, for smaller councils, maybe smaller than regional capitals, that is a process. So they've changed it, and we've participating in this process at the moment. They've changed it so that you now, for this particular program, you put in an expression of interest. Now, the expression of interest is meant to be fairly light, an overview of the project without all the detail that really fills out the rest of the project. And the idea is you don't spend a lot of time and money doing the EOI. You submit that. Their staff don't have to spend a lot of time and money going through and investigating those. And they give you a bit of a stop-go at that point. We've looked at that EOI based on our guidelines and based on the information given us. We don't think it's applicable. Don't go any further.
Yep. Don't spend any more money, or...
That's right. Or we've had a look at it. We think you've got a good chance. If you go and flesh this out, here's the data we need. Go and do that for us.
Yep.
Then you've got a pretty reasonable chance to get it.
I like that too, because they're going to help the councils, I'd suggest, direct them to where they should be spending their money, I suppose, in regards to what they're looking for in the grants.
That's right. And don't waste a bunch of money on putting in grant applications and doing a whole range of things. So, look, it was a good meeting. You, again, got that handle on some of that background information, so that was really important.
Good.
And I just think it's good to continue on those relationships with those various ministers. We did talk about renewable energy zone a little bit, but it was more about just general infrastructure and making sure we get infrastructure up to the right level. And the airports, we certainly spoke about the airports. That was an important part of that. And again, I did actually offer to give away our airport. I said, if you want the airport back, because the Commonwealth gave the airport we've got here in Dubbo to Dubbo back around 1970.
Yeah, right.
And they were all owned by the federal government, and again, they cost money, so they gave them local councils. Said, here you go, have a nice day. But the regulations and rules around an airport are governed by the federal government, but we have to implement those. So security screening, for example, we've got to do that, we've got to pay for that, but the federal government imposes those rules. She didn't take me up on the offer to take the airport back. But I said, I'm pretty sure that many councils around the state
the costs incurred, exactly,
would give you back. Now, we do make money out of our airport on an operational level, so when I say I'll give it back to you, I'm not sure that I want to give it back, but the problem is the only way we make money at an operational level is because we get grants for capital expenditure. If we had to pay for all the maintenance on the runway in particular, that's expensive, all the maintenance on that facility without those capital grants, then we'd be losing money on it. So we only can make money out of those capital grants.
Now, looking through here, you also caught up with the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories, Kristy McBain. So what was the conversation with her, and how does all this connect up with maybe the other two conversations?
Well, we didn't actually catch up with Kristy in the end. We caught up with a couple of her staff.
Right.
And
sorry, you saw the staff, my
yeah,
mistake.
That's right. And it's often good. I mean, ministers will come along with their staff typically, and you'll have a discussion. But it's sometimes not so bad if the minister's busy to catch up with staff. Now, I've caught up with Kristy. I'm actually very impressed with some of the things Kristy's done in the past. And I've caught up with her a few times before. I've met her several times. But she wasn't available at the time, but we had a bit of a chat to her staff. But more importantly, and this was a direction from one of the other ministers we spoke to, we also caught up with staff from the Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. So a couple of staff from Kristy's office. Okay. That was good to talk to them and just get a bit of a feel for things that are happening. But we caught up with 9 staff from that department.
Right.
And that was an incredibly important meeting. When we sat around, and again, these are the staff that are in charge of a whole range of different areas. So we had various heads within that department of different areas, and I was very impressed. They sat down with 9 of us.
So they specifically said, look, we need to go and see you guys. This is very important to us as well.
Well, no, we had one of the ministers who said, you need to go and talk to my department, and then that meeting was arranged because they thought it was important to sit down and talk to some of these people. What was clear to me was that it's all very new for them. Some of the renewable energy zones are progressing, but they're trying to work out where they fit in. And that point I made before about where does federal fit in, where does state, you've heard me talk about it before, the process where you get a planning agreement with wind providers, but no planning agreement or no money to the local community through council from solar providers. So we got a chance to talk to the department, and these are the people that are making not decisions, but they're making the recommendations with all the supporting information through to the ministers who normally say, well, that makes sense to me, assuming it does, let's go forward with that. You've got to get that data information from somewhere. That's what this was doing. They were doing a fact
like ongoing standing committees all over the place, aren't they?
That's right. What they actually, I think they learned a lot from us. We learned a bit from them in terms of some of the things that they're doing, but they learned a lot from us around the engagement. One of the things we said around engagement was everyone's doing consultation. Each individual proponent has to do consultation as part of their EIS and their submission. Energy Co is doing consultation. the state government's doing consultation, and now the federal government's going to come and do consultation. You're going to over-consult people.
Absolutely.
Maybe you would be better as the federal government, and this is where the federal government can fit in, to do some overarching consultation in an area, and then you can give that comprehensive consultation you have already done to the proponents and the state government to say, we've done this already. You don't need to go each one individually and wear out everyone's time from a consultation process.
I know that we actually talked a little bit about this in regards to the overseeing process of all of this when it comes to the renewable energy zones around Australia. Like, who actually is looking out for everything? Like, who's doing the guiding principle? Who's sort of sitting there going, or which group's sitting there going, all right, it's great to see Western Australia's doing a great job there, New South Wales, you're doing this. Someone's keeping control over the whole lot of it and getting a bit of an understanding of where it's all heading. But federal government doesn't seem to be really taking this sort of initiative at this point in time.
Well, my answer to you when you asked that question before was no, there's no one doing that.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
I think there is definitely a role to play for the department, because it does need someone to sit over the top of all of that. And the other thing, so we talked about that. That's a thing, and they scribbled down notes to say, yes, that looks like a great idea.
That's a good thing.
The next thing we talked about was the process that we've already talked about with that planning agreement process. You need some sort of framework. We've now sent them Dubbo Regional Council's framework.
Oh, really?
We've sent them an example of where our framework is used with an agreement that we've got in place, agreement we've almost finalised with one particular proponent at the moment.
Right.
And again, I've had some discussions after that meeting, subsequent to that, with some of the staff there saying, this is fascinating, this is really good, we want to look at this. So here we have the federal government using an example of what's happening in our council to try and maybe develop this overarching framework. That would be fantastic. And I said that to them at the meeting. If you did nothing else but came up with a consistent set of guidelines to say to the proponents, the state government, to say everyone involved, here's what you need to be doing with the local councils, that'd be fantastic. And I think they're in a better position to do that than the state government.
Oh, I love that. Like, that just seems to make so much more sense and potentially could answer my question in regards to who's going to look out for all of this in the long run. So that's great.
Exactly. And again, I'm impressed that they were sensible enough to say, well, if you're already doing it out there and it seems to work, let's grab your example and have a look at that. But I suspect I'll be talking with some of those people in the department a lot more over the next few months because they are really looking for ways to make sure they get it right.
I would imagine, Matt, when you get down to Canberra, it's a pretty big place, that Parliament House. I've been there a couple of times. Unfortunately, I don't seem to have the access to the areas that you would have, but I just sort of do the old general sort of tourist thing, and I've been through there with a number of kids over the years and families and all that sort of stuff. But I would imagine once you get into the inner sanctum, let's call it the inner sanctum, you must bump into some pretty cool people.
Well, some interesting people, and it's always, you've got to seize those opportunities. I've got the all-access pass, which is fantastic, so I can go through and stroll through the corridors.
It's so Tom Cruise of you, sort of.
But it's a simple thing. So I line up there. We had a break in our meeting, so I line up there to just grab a quick bite to eat at the cafeteria, and there's a few different ones there, and one of the particular ones there. And there's David Littleproud standing right in front of me. So, of course, he's the leader of the National Party.
Yes.
He was in Dubbo a month or two ago for an anniversary, 15th anniversary for Mark Coulton. And I just happened to be sitting opposite him at that dinner. So he's standing there in front of me. Hey, David. And I haven't got a big enough ego to think that he would immediately recognise me.
Long time no see. How are you?
And so I reminded him who I was. And he said, oh, that's right. I remember sitting opposite you at that dinner.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And so, again, it's just another chance to chat. A few things we talked about on that night, a bit of a chat about a few things. So you're just making sure that Dubbo's in the front of his mind and you're having that discussion. I did catch up with Mark Coulton. I mean, he's our local member. I talk to Mark regularly. I normally don't try and organise a meeting with him in Canberra because I often talk to him out here in Dubbo. But he did actually run into me in a different cafeteria there, so had a bit of a chat about a few different things. That was fine. But the other chance meeting I thought was quite good was someone actually mentioned to me in our group, they said, I just saw Alan Joyce over in the corner.
Yes, the old CEO of Qantas.
Correct.
Yes.
And I said, oh, that's good. I'll go and say, g'day, Alan. And they thought I was joking. And I jumped up and walked over there. Now, Alan was in Dubbo maybe 8 years ago.
Yep.
And there were a few things that were happening at the time. We had John Gissing, who's the head of Qantas Link, who was doing me a favour coming along to a CEO series that organised with the Chamber of Commerce to do a talk. But then on the back of that, Qantas thought it'd be good to bring out their board for a board meeting in Dubbo.
This and this happened, yes.
That's right.
Yeah.
And they also, at a similar time, were launching the Q400 series into Dubbo. They were upgrading some of the planes.
Yep.
So Alan Joyce came out. I met him here in Dubbo and we talked about a range of things there. Did the Q400 launch, did the board meeting. I actually went along to their board meeting and said good day to a few of their board for one little segment there. So basically went over to Alan, how you going? remember you met me in Dubbo many years ago again.
Remind me never to play Truth and Dare with you, I swear to God. Put down a dare. Oh, you can do it every time. I dare to go and have a chat to Alan Joyce. Oh, okay, of course you do.
But he was incredibly friendly, and I was very impressed that he was very engaged. It wasn't like, yeah, sure thing, have a nice day, who are you again?
Yep. Very
engaged, but more importantly, he said, oh, by the way, while you're there, please meet Vanessa Hudson. Now, Alan's announced his retirement from Qantas, and they'd already announced
Is she the new CEO? Ago. Is that the one?
She's the new CEO.
Oh,
so
wow.
he's the new CEO having a chat, and I said, well, Alan brought the board out to Dubbo for a board meeting, so... Look, I think it would be appropriate for you to bring out the board.
I love the fact you just take these opportunities and sort of throw it straight in there. I love that.
Well, I didn't expect and I did say this to you, I don't expect you to bring your first board meeting out to Dubbo, but maybe the second or third one. So I'm now going to follow up. I haven't done it yet, but I'm going to follow up with a letter that I'll send through to Alan and Vanessa and say thanks for coming, thanks for saying good day at Parliament House. And by the way, here's your formal invitation out to Dubbo. We'd love to see you board out here. Love to see you speak at a chamber breakfast, for example, that type of thing. But again, you do have to just grab those opportunities when they're there.
Well done for grabbing them. That's impressive. That's great.
And who knows what you might get out of those. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
You never know what you get out of these various random meetings that you might have.
That's right. Well, mate, it's time for the Limerick of the Week. So we've gone through a number of things here today. We talked about bumping into Alan Joyce and the new CEO there of Qantas. We've talked about the Regional Capitals Australia Board meeting. What else? We had a little chat about there. Oh, of course, the standing committees. What are you going to talk about? What's going to be your Limerick this week?
I'm actually finding it tougher and tougher. I think I need to start doing multiple Limericks, but they take too long to
Combination of all of the above.
Well, actually, maybe that's not a bad idea, but you haven't got much space in a limerick.
No, that's right. Well,
to bring in too many topics. That's right. So it was tough, and it's getting tougher each week because we do seem to be talking. There's so much happening, and there's lots of things to talk about. But I did really enjoy the judging of the Rhino, the new Rhino design.
Nice choice.
I thought I'd go with that one. So it goes something like this: Dubbo's children, both talented and bright, entered a contest with pure delight. With artistic lines on Rhino designs, their winning artworks will be a splendid sight.
Ah, mate, well done as usual. Congratulations, and I'm sure the kids out there will love that little one as well. Well, folks, that just about wraps up again for another Straight from the Mayor's Mouth. Until next week, everyone, take care.
Straight from the Mayor's Mouth with Matthew Dickerson from Dubbo Regional Council.